G'day folks, my name is Rob. Welcome back to another F1 Fantasy video. Today we are going to preview my team selection for race week 2, how the team is shaping up after a very successful outing in Bahrain, and any transfer plans I have in mind for the week ahead. If you like what you see, do subscribe to the channel. I'm really loving all the support and engagement I'm getting on there from you guys so far, and I'm really hoping to push a few more videos out with 2 weeks between now and Saudi Arabia. So if we take a look at my team over here, 299 points for the first race week of the season. All in all across the board, very happy with how things went. There were no real issues from start to finish from the moment qualifying commenced. The only real concern, as I know a number of you also had before qualifying, was Lance Stroll. I just wasn't sure how he would hold up over the course of a full race with those sore wrists, 2 broken wrists, and needing to steer that car was going to be no small feat, but he managed to put in a legendary performance, as Fernando Alonso described it, and ultimately was the right decision between him and Valtteri Bottas. Bottas actually didn't have a bad drive by any means. I think he finished on around 13 points for the race week, so the difference was close to negligible. That aside, Verstappen, DRS boosted 35 points, became 70 quick smart. He was the leader of the pack from the get-go. So no complaints. That was always going to be on him and will likely be on him for the duration of the season for me. Alonso put in a stellar performance, 39 points. 10 of those were attributed to driver of the day, but he is probably going to be another permanent fixture in my team for the season. Perez did his part, 28 points, second place, can't complain with that. And Joe, he was one I've kind of been high on since preseason testing. I've really liked the look of him in that Alpha second year there. So 15 points, yes, 10 of that was fastest lap. And unlike in the real world, he gets points for the fastest lap even if he finishes outside the top 10. So I'm cheering about that. But he's probably the only driver I've got, on the chopping block for the next race in Saudi Arabia. We'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, all in all, a very strong first outing for the F1 Fantasy Hub team. And Red Bull and Aston Martin goes without saying after what I've talked about the drivers above, the 2 best constructors to own this weekend, and that was reflected in their performance and their points. So I want to quickly jump over to the team page. As I said, pretty content with how the team's shaping up. Before we get to Saudi Arabia, we've got 2 weeks, so a lot of time to think, stew on our decisions, our strategy, how we want to play this the next few weeks. Before I get into any potential transfers, player selection ideas, etc., I just want to kind of draw your attention to the price rises. I did put out a tweet earlier around my concerns with how pricing adjustments have been factored into this season. I did exhibit concerns in previous videos that F1 may be a little kind of over-enthusiastic with how they want to adjust prices every week, but they've gone in what I would argue is the opposite direction and the worst direction possible. Prices have barely moved since the race. In their preseason announcement, they said that prices would only change once at the start of every race week, and to see Max Verstappen go up 0.1, Alonso go up 0.2, it's just mind-boggling with the logic they put in to decide what the prices need to be. There needed to be more, I guess, aggressive pricing adjustments, not to the extent that it became, impractical to not own certain assets that went up in price, but at least give players the option to pivot between other drivers and constructors, and we just don't have that at all. I'll get into my transfer plans in a second, and I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. But it's essentially going to become too easy for other players with assets such as Ferrari or AlphaTauri who want to move into a team like this, and with 2 trades and a -4 hit for any extra trade you want to make after the fact, it gives me the impression that within the next week, if not 2 weeks, everyone will have a pretty similar team for Saudi Arabia, if not by Australia, especially given how underpriced not just Red Bull but Aston Martin also are. I just would have thought F1 would have learnt their lesson after the pricing debacle last season, but it just seems to me as though they can't get this right. And given how important pricing is to a game like F1 Fantasy, it's just not going to make it an overly interesting season if we all have the same team for 23 races. But anyway, that aside, I've got 2 weeks until the next race, so I'm sure you'll hear from me on this again. But as I mentioned, Joe is probably the only driver on my team I'm looking to mix up ahead of Saudi Arabia. He was and still is a very good driver in my opinion, and at 4.9 is pretty good value at that price point. But given the way pricing has been structured, and certainly for more budget-friendly drivers towards points rewarded for overtaking and positions gained, you want to be really considering those drivers that start all the way back at the back of the grid, have a poor qualifying, and then make up positions on race day, whether that's through teams ahead of them that DNF, have strategy issues, or in, say, Esteban Ocon's case, doesn't know how to get a penalty right, look to make up points and places in the race as a result of those errors from drivers ahead of them. So I guess for me, the two drivers, well, I guess one really, if that I've got on my list at the moment is Logan Sargent. I did really hope that the price increases would be enough that I'd be able to get to Alex Albon, but that's not to be. So I will likely be settling for a Logan Sargent, or even maybe one of the AlphaTauri boys. Haven't yet decided, but given Sargent, as we saw in qualifying, he did qualify 16th, which I thought for him was an excellent start in the Williams. He looks like one of the options I'll be bringing into my team. The other one that I've thought about is Nick De Vries. He qualified in 19th, made up 5 positions net on race day. So they're just two that spring to mind for me, but realistically you want to be considering drivers that won't have a great qualifying and then manage to do a little better on race day. Albon is one that just sticks out to me as someone you can always count on to make up those places. We saw him put in a number of brilliant performances last season, and I think he's going to replicate that heading into this season too. But that aside, there are obviously a number of you that own Ferrari assets over the weekend, and to be honest, it was a team build that I seriously considered up until about Friday of last week. Ferrari is, or at least what I thought was, an asset that would just be able to get you a consistent amount of points every week. They've got 2 competitive drivers in a very good car. But I guess the problem that seems to stick with them this season is that reliability. Ferrari, are a very proud team, and you would hope don't kind of let this issue persist throughout the season. But we saw this happen on a number of occasions last year, and they just still don't seem to get it right. I know this was an engine problem for Leclerc, but anyone who owned him and or owned the Ferrari constructor were pretty badly hurt. In a game where reliability carries more weight than it ever has before, and those minus 20 DNF hits can really make or break your game week, picking assets that are going to be reliable and just make it through the race in some cases are going to be your saving grace. Red Bull, Aston Martin to me are looking like 2 teams and teams of drivers that are going to be able to put that kind of performance in every week. Even Mercedes, I'm not saying they had by any means the most fantastic race weekend in comparison, but last season they had one of the lowest DNF percentages of all teams, and I probably expect that's going to continue this season. Actually, funnily enough, Aston Martin last season were also very reliable, and Stroll through the middle part of 2022 was a popular pick for many people because he was just able to complete races and deliver 10, 15 points a race. So you want to be prioritizing assets and teams that have reliability and can get to the end of a race. So I wouldn't be surprised if a number of you or a number of people on Ferrari do pivot into those Aston Martin and Red Bull builds, but I suppose we're just going to have to wait and see how the next week or 2 shakes out. It seems to me, based on the pricing and how the game is likely to be played and the point scoring system in place, this template is going to be pretty popular for the foreseeable future. So I mean, as great as it is to score these points, it doesn't make for a super interesting game when you're rotating a budget driver every week or every second week. But anyway, I just thought I wanted to give my 2 cents on the state of play at the moment, how teams are going. But all in all, a very successful first race week. Very happy. Now up at 56,000 in the world from, I guess, where we all were at the start of the season. But hoping to continue that with a team that I think looks pretty solid. I'll come back later in the week with a few other videos around my watch list, transfer plans, race week preview, all that good stuff. But in the meantime, if you have liked what you've seen, do subscribe to the video. And I see you all very, very soon.